Hello friends, today we are going to start the topic about gluconeogenesis. Okay, now at the beginning of this class, first we will discuss what do we mean by gluconeogenesis. Now from the name, what does it suggest? Gluconeogenesis. It means the synthesis of a new glucose molecule. Now, what is important here, the substrate in case of gluconeogenesis is non-carbohydrate source. Now, we all know that our main source of energy is glucose, and our body stores excess glucose in the form of glycogen. Now, when we are during periods in the periods in between our meals, this glycogen is broken down to provide us with energy. But glycogen is a homopolysaccharide of glucose. It is a carbohydrate, and hence breaking down of glycogen, that is not gluconeogenesis. If we use any other monosaccharide which is converted to glucose, or any disaccharide like lactose which is broken down to glucose, that is not gluconeogenesis. For gluconeogenesis, it is essential that the source must be a non-carbohydrate source. Why do we need glucogenesis? Now here I want to stress one point, that until now the cycles we did, the TCA cycle, glycolysis, the main aim of the pathway was to provide us with energy. In case of gluconeogenesis, the aim of the pathway is not to provide us with energy, but to synthesize the glucose molecule itself. Here we are concerned about glucose. Okay, so we will see later on that during gluconeogenesis, energy is not produced. In the other hand, energy is utilized. But still, we need glucose in our body. The glucose as a molecule itself is essential for our body. Why is gluconeogenesis, or why is glucose so essential? It is because certain organs like the brain and the RBCs, they are entirely dependent on glucose for our energy needs. We have stores of fat which we can break down as a source of energy in times of need, but the organs like the brain and RBC, they cannot use the energy which is derived from fat. They need glucose only. Our body normally stores enough glucose for just one day. Around 160 grams of glucose are stored by our body, after which the brain itself consumes around 120 grams of sugar. So for this, the blood glucose level has to be maintained around the range of 70 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. Now, where does this glucose come from? We said that glucose is essential, and where does this glucose come from? Now, all of us know that initially we get our glucose from our meal. So if we consider the meal as the 0 point or the start point, like whenever we take a meal, the glucose which we get from the digestion and absorption of that food, that is a source of glucose in the period after a meal. After some time, when this glucose supply decreases, then glycogen breakdown starts, or in other words, glycogenolysis. So glycogen, it is stored in the liver and also in the muscles, so that glycogen is broken down and it will provide us with glucose. But the store of glycogen is short-lived. It cannot last for a very long time. So at the same time, another process also starts, which is gluconeogenesis. And actually it starts within 4 to 6 hours of the last meal. So if you see this graph will give you an idea of how the levels of glucose are maintained. So this 0 point is the time in which we ingest a meal. So this is ingested glucose, which will bring about the peak of glucose. Now after some time, glycogenolysis starts, and glycogen, the source of glucose from glycogen, is the main source. Within 4 to 6 hours, gluconeogenesis starts. Gradually it rises. Now if you can see, glycogen breakdowns last only until 24 hours, that is one day. So after that, it is gluconeogenesis which is taking place. So if we talk of conditions like prolonged fasting or starvation, it is gluconeogenesis which is going to provide us with the glucose. So it is this gluconeogenesis which is life-saving. What is the site of gluconeogenesis? Like all other metabolic processes, the liver is the major site of gluconeogenesis. Other than that, we have also the renal cortex. The renal cortex can take part in gluconeogenesis. Its capacity of gluconeogenesis is equivalent to that of the liver, but since the renal cortex is smaller in size than the liver, its contribution is comparatively less. Other than this, it can also take part in the small intestine. And how does these organs contribute to the glucose in the rest of the body? So gluconeogenesis, which takes place in the liver, it contributes mainly to the blood glucose. So the blood glucose is maintained by the glucose which is synthesized in the liver. The renal cortex also synthesizes a lot of glucose, but most of that is utilized by the renal medulla itself. Okay. In certain abnormal metabolic states like prolonged starvation, the kidney becomes a major organ, and this process takes place partly in the cytosol and partly in the mitochondria. Next, coming to substrates, like we already said that it is essential that the glucose is synthesized from a non-carbohydrate source. So what are these non-carbohydrate sources which are utilized? We have lactate, pyruvate, propionate, glycerol, and glucogenic amino acids. Now, I'm not going to talk about the processes now, but once we have done the reactions of gluconeogenesis, I will be talking about these substrates one by one. Okay. So this is again a recap of the substrates. So we have lactate, pyruvate, and then we have glucogenic amino acids and also glycerol, which is obtained from the breakdown of triglycerides, which are obtained through the diet or from the sources. Other than this, we have glucogenic amino acids and propionate. Next, coming to the reactions of gluconeogenesis. Now, before you study the reactions of gluconeogenesis, my suggestion is please revise glycolysis first. Because glycolysis and gluconeogenesis are highly related. If you understand the reactions of glycolysis and remember them properly, reading gluconeogenesis becomes very easy. So first revise glycolysis before you study the reactions of gluconeogenesis. Now glycolysis is a breakdown of glucose and gluconeogenesis is the synthesis of glucose from pyruvate. So glycolysis is glucose to pyruvate, gluconeogenesis is pyruvate to glucose. But both of them are not exact reversals of each other. Now glycolysis consists of 10 sequential reactions. So if you remember from glycolysis, out of this, 7 out of 10 steps were reversible. So in case of gluconeogenesis, these 7 steps are an exact reversal of glycolysis. Now in case of glycolysis, we had 3 irreversible steps. Number 1, it was the conversion of glucose to glucose 6-phosphate. Number 2, the conversion of fructose 6-phosphate to fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Number 3, the final reaction of glycolysis, which was the conversion of phosphoenol pyruvate to pyruvate. So these 3 reactions were the irreversible reactions. So these 3 have to be bypassed by 3 separate reactions. And we will be going through these reactions one by one. Now the first bypass is the conversion of pyruvate to phosphoenol pyruvate. So if you remember the forward reaction, it was the conversion of phosphoenol pyruvate to pyruvate. This is the final reaction of glycolysis. It was catalyzed by the enzyme pyruvate kinase. Now the reversal of this reaction, it is not possible. Why? Because this reaction was accompanied by the release of a large amount of free energy, and so the reaction does not go in the opposite way. So we have to have a separate bypass pathway. Now this reaction takes place in 2 steps. As you can see, it is first the conversion of pyruvate to oxaloacetate and then oxaloacetate to phosphoenol pyruvate. What complicates the reaction a bit more is that this reaction takes place partly in the cytosol and partly into the mitochondria. So how it takes place, we will see. So we have 4 steps. This reaction is circumvented by 2 reactions, which takes place partly in the cytosol and partly in the mitochondria. Now the step 1 is the transport of pyruvate. Now where do we get pyruvate from? Pyruvate is the end product of glycolysis. And where does glycolysis take place? It takes place in the cytosol. So initially we have pyruvate, which is generated in the cytosol from glycolysis. It is the end product of glycolysis. Now, as we saw in the previous reaction, that pyruvate is converted to oxaloacetate. But this conversion takes place in the mitochondria. And the mitochondrial membrane is impermeable to pyruvate. So it is unable to cross the mitochondrial membrane, and it is transported across the membrane with the help of a monocarboxylate carrier. Okay. So next, the pyruvate has entered into the mitochondria. The next reaction is the conversion of pyruvate to oxaloacetate. So this is a simple carboxylation reaction, and it is catalyzed by pyruvate carboxylase utilizing a molecule of ATP. So here, pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon compound, it is carboxylated to oxaloacetate, which is a 4-carbon compound, is catalyzed by pyruvate carboxylase. The coenzyme is biotin, and 1 ATP is utilized. Okay, so next, oxaloacetate has been generated. Oxaloacetate has to be transported back into the cytosol, where the rest of the reactions take place. So here again, the same problem is there, that the mitochondrial membrane, it is impermeable to oxaloacetate. So the oxaloacetate which has been generated in the mitochondria has to be transferred back to the cytosol. The mitochondrial membrane is impermeable to oxaloacetate. So it is transported by a system which we call the malate shuttle system. The oxaloacetate, it is converted into malate, and then it is transported across the membrane. This system of transporting oxaloacetate across the mitochondrial membrane in the form of malate is also called the malate shuttle. Now this is a very important topic and a common question which is very commonly asked in your exams. So now we will see that how the malate shuttle works. So here we have the cytosol and the mitochondria. Pyruvate was generated in the cytosol as a breakdown product of glycolysis. Then pyruvate is transported into the mitochondria. The carrier here is a monocarboxylate carrier. Next, pyruvate has to be converted into oxaloacetate. This is done by the enzyme pyruvate carboxylase. The oxaloacetate has to be transferred back into the cytosol, but since the mitochondrial membrane is impermeable to oxaloacetate, it is transported in the form of malate. So the first reaction is the conversion of oxaloacetate to malate, and this is done by the enzyme malate dehydrogenase, which, if you remember, this reaction is a reaction of the TCA cycle also. Now this malate, it comes out of the mitochondria, and this is done with the help of a dicarboxylate carrier. After this, the oxaloacetate has to be regenerated, which is done again by malate dehydrogenase, because that reaction was a reversible reaction. And then finally, this oxaloacetate, it is converted into phosphoenol pyruvate. So if we have a revision of this, so we have the cytosol and the mitochondria, the pyruvate, it enters into the mitochondria with the help of a monocarboxylate carrier. Then it is carboxylated, converting it to oxaloacetate. Oxaloacetate is converted to malate by the enzyme malate dehydrogenase. Malate comes out of the mitochondria with the help of a dicarboxylate carrier. Then malate is converted back to oxaloacetate by the enzyme malate dehydrogenase. So oxaloacetate is regenerated. And in the next step, we will see that oxaloacetate, it is converted to phosphoenol pyruvate. So this part is the part which forms the malate shuttle system. Next reaction is the conversion of oxaloacetate to phosphoenol pyruvate. So in the cytosol, the oxaloacetate undergoes decarboxylation and phosphorylation, and this is catalyzed by an enzyme which is called phosphoenol pyruvate carboxykinase, which we also call PepsiK. And here also another molecule of GTP is required, and we know that GTP is equivalent to ATP. So utilization of 1 GTP means actually the utilization of 1 ATP. So this is the reaction, the conversion of oxaloacetate to phosphoenol pyruvate in the presence of the enzyme PepsiK, and 1 ATP is utilized over here. So you can see that with the help of these two reactions, we had started from pyruvate, and here we are ending in phosphoenol pyruvate. So that was our aim of this reaction, that is the conversion of pyruvate to phosphoenol pyruvate. The direct reversal of pyruvate kinase was not possible, so we did it with the help of these two bypass reactions. So if we have a summary again, that pyruvate, first it is carboxylated giving oxaloacetate. Then since oxaloacetate cannot be transported across the mitochondrial membrane, it is transported with the help of the malate shuttle. So we have the conversion of oxaloacetate to malate, and then regeneration of oxaloacetate. In oxaloacetate, in the presence of the enzyme PepCK, it is converted to phosphoenol pyruvate. So we started with pyruvate, and now we have phosphoenol pyruvate. So we have successfully bypassed the 10th reaction of glycolysis. Next, series of reactions that were all reversible. So these reactions are just an exact reversal of glycolysis, and the energetics are also just opposite. So when you are writing down the reactions of glycolysis, gluconeogenesis, my suggestion is that first you just write the reactions of glycolysis and do the reverse of each of these reactions. Then you will not get confused. So here we have phosphoenol pyruvate, 2-phosphoglycerate, 3-phosphoglycerate, 1,3-bis-phosphoglycerate, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, and dihydroxyacetone phosphate being converted to fructose 1,6-bis-phosphate. So again, the same principle which was there in glycolysis, that each of these reactions are taking place twice. Why? Because here we are synthesizing glucose from pyruvate. Pyruvate is a 3-carbon compound and glucose is a 6-carbon compound. So until fructose 1,6-bisphosphate is generated, each of these reactions are going to take place twice. So the energetics also has to be calculated twice. The second bypass is the dephosphorylation of fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Now, if you remember the forward reaction, that is the conversion of fructose 6-phosphate to fructose 1,6-bisphosphate in the presence of the enzyme PFK1. So the reverse reaction is very simple. It is the enzyme here is fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase. Now this, if you remember that this forward reaction was a very important regulatory point of glycolysis. Similarly, the reverse reaction is also a very important regulatory point of gluconeogenesis. So here it is catalyzed by fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase. It bypasses the PFK catalyzed reaction. It requires magnesium, and it is an important control point for gluconeogenesis. Next, the conversion of fructose 6-phosphate to glucose 6-phosphate. Again, this was a reversible reaction. So the same enzyme is here, which is phosphohexose isomerase. Finally, we come to the third bypass, and this was the first reaction of glycolysis. That is, there was the conversion of glucose to glucose 6-phosphate in the presence of hexokinase or glucokinase. In the reverse reaction, the enzyme is glucose 6-phosphatase, and the phosphate group, it is released here in the form of inorganic phosphate. So here again, it is catalyzed by glucose 6-phosphatase, which releases inorganic phosphate. It requires magnesium. In this enzyme, it is present on the luminal side of the endoplasmic reticulum. Very, very important that the muscle and brain, they lack this enzyme, so they cannot perform gluconeogenesis. So though they can perform all of the reactions, they come and stop at glucose 6-phosphate. Glucose 6-phosphate cannot be converted to glucose. So this is why the muscle and brain cannot perform, this is why the muscle cannot perform gluconeogenesis. Now coming to the energetics of gluconeogenesis. Now, here, in case of glycolysis in the TCA cycle, we were talking about everywhere. Here we had the number of ATPs which is being produced. But in case of the gluconeogenesis, it is the number of ATPs being utilized. So as we already saw, in the first bypass reaction, we are using 4 ATPs. The conversion of 3-phosphoglycerate to 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate, we are utilizing 2 ATPs. And the conversion of 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, we are using 2 NADH molecules. So we can see that energetically, gluconeogenesis is quite an expensive process. But though it is expensive, yet it is essential at the time of crisis. Okay, so though we are spending a lot of ATP, but the synthesis of glucose, it is essential for us to survive. So our body will perform gluconeogenesis even at the expense of so much of energy. So this is a recap of all of the reactions. I'm not going to go through them. You can just look at them one by one. So here we have the glycolytic pathway, and the opposite, the blue one, is the gluconeogenetic pathway. So it is almost the same, just three reactions are different. So here you have to remember the bypass reactions. Now coming to the substrates of gluconeogenesis. Lactate, pyruvate, propionate, glycerol and glucogenic amino acids. Now we will be going through the reactions of these one by one. Okay. So starting with lactate. Now where is lactate synthesized? Lactate is mainly synthesized in the skeletal muscle as an end product of anaerobic glycolysis. Okay. So what is the enzyme here converting? Normally in glycolysis the end product is pyruvate. In pyruvate it is converted to lactate with the help of the enzyme pyruvate lactate dehydrogenase. Okay. But this reaction is a reversible reaction. So in anaerobic glycolysis, pyruvate is converted to lactate with the help of lactate dehydrogenase. And during gluconeogenesis, lactate is converted back to pyruvate with the help of the same enzyme, lactate dehydrogenase. Now in case of the muscles, lactate and alanine, both they help in gluconeogenesis. So if you see that this is the muscle, this is the bloodstream and this is the liver. So in the muscle, if we start with the muscle, what do we have? That glucose, through glycolysis it gives pyruvate. Some amount of lactate is also generated due to anaerobic glycolysis in case of actively contracting muscles. And part of the pyruvate it is transaminated giving alanine. This reaction you will read when you study about amino acid metabolism. So you have pyruvate which is converted to lactate with the help of lactate dehydrogenase and it is transaminated to alanine. Now this pyruvate, lactate and alanine, all of them enter the bloodstream and reach the liver. In the liver, again alanine it is converted back to pyruvate by deamination and lactate is converted back to pyruvate by the enzyme lactate dehydrogenase. So ultimately we are getting pyruvate, then pyruvate with the help of the bypass reactions of gluconeogenesis, it helps to synthesize glucose. So the glucose from the liver is again enters the blood and it is transported to the muscle again. So this is how the glucose is regenerated in the muscle. The glucose is regenerated. The glucose which is broken down in the muscle again it is regenerated in the liver with the help of this gluconeogenesis pathway. So this cycle which is involving the regeneration of lactate is called the Cody's cycle and regeneration of alanine this is and the cycle involving alanine that is called the chiral cycle. Next, TCA intermediates. TCA cycle intermediates can also serve as a substrate for gluconeogenesis. Because if you remember that the first bypass reaction of gluconeogenesis, we had oxaloacetate as an intermediate. Okay. Now, when we are talking about different compounds and the end product of their metabolism, if they are metabolized to any component of TCA cycle, since the TCA cycle is going on, ultimately they can lead to oxaloacetate. And oxaloacetates then can enter gluconeogenesis. So since gluconeogenesis is a continuous process, sequence of reactions, if we can synthesize any intermediates of the cycle, it can lead to the formation of glucose. Now later we will see that most of the glucogenic amino acids, they are metabolized into some intermediate of the TCA cycle. So whatever intermediate is synthesized, since it is a cyclic pathway, ultimately it will lead to the formation of oxaloacetate and oxaloacetate can be diverted into gluconeogenesis. Glycerol. Where do we get glycerol from? We get it from triglycerides. And where do we get the triglycerides from? Either from our diet or from our storage. So triglycerides through lipolysis, they are broken down into fatty acid and glycerol. So here we are concerned only about the glycerol part. So the glycerol with the help of the enzyme glycerol kinase, it is converted to glycerol 3-phosphate. Now if you remember the steps of glycolysis, glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate and its isomer dihydroxyacetone phosphate, they were intermediates. Now this glycerol 3-phosphate with the help of the enzyme dehydrogenase, it is converted into dihydroxyacetone phosphate. This was an intermediate of the glycolysis, so it can just be reversed and channeled into gluconeogenesis. Okay, so we have triglycerides broken down to fatty acid and glycerol. Glycerol is converted to glycerol 3-phosphate. Then it is converted into dihydroxyacetone phosphate, and finally it is channeled into gluconeogenesis. Glucogenic amino acids. Alanine and glutamine are the main glucogenic amino acids in human. Now, if you see this table here, it is a list of amino acids, which I don't want you to remember now. When you study about amino acids, in the beginning you will see there is a classification: glucogenic amino acids, ketogenic amino acids, and both gluco and ketogenic amino acids. Now there are only two ketogenic amino acids, which are lysine and leucine, and the rest are glucogenic. Okay, isoleucine can go either way, and the rest are glucogenic. So if you want to remember which are the glucogenic amino acids, just minus the two ketogenic amino acids, rest are glucogenic. This table here shows the end product of catabolism. Again, I'm saying that don't go into the details, but just look about the headings: pyruvate, alpha-ketoglutarate, succinyl-CoA, fumarate, oxaloacetate. So these are the end product of metabolism of these amino acids. If you can notice, each of these end products are intermediates of the TCA cycle. So once these amino acids are metabolized, what we are getting as the end product is an intermediate of the TCA cycle, and through this these amino acids will be channeled into gluconeogenesis. So when you study about the metabolism of amino acids, this will be more clear and you will be able to remember it. What cannot be converted to glucose? This is very, very important. Number one, fatty acids. Now, fatty acids, when you study fat metabolism, you will see that the end product of fatty acid oxidation is acetyl-CoA. Now, normally pyruvate, it is converted to acetyl-CoA with the help of the enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase. But this reverse reaction is not possible. So normally pyruvate, it is converted to acetyl-CoA, and this is done by the enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase. Now the end product of fatty acid oxidation is acetyl-CoA, but the reverse conversion of acetyl-CoA to pyruvate, that is not possible. Okay, so it is very important that though fatty acids are good as a source of energy, they cannot be used as substrates for gluconeogenesis. Exception is in odd chain fatty acids, which are catabolized into propionate, which is ultimately converted to succinyl-CoA. So odd chain fatty acids, they are catabolized into propionate, and which is converted into succinyl-CoA. Again, this reaction you will be reading when you do amino acid metabolism and or fat metabolism. So I'm not going to talk about it now. So just remember that odd chain fatty acids can serve as substrates in gluconeogenesis, the rest cannot. And the next is ketone bodies. Ketone bodies also cannot serve as a substrate for gluconeogenesis. So if we have the recap of all the substrates, pyruvate is converted to oxaloacetate through the bypass reaction, which leads to formation of glucose. Lactate is converted to pyruvate, then oxaloacetate, then glucose. Amino acids, they usually give rise to TCA cycle intermediates, which can be converted through oxaloacetate to glucose. Odd chain fatty acids, they are converted to propionate. Propionate is converted to succinyl-CoA, which can lead to glucose. Glycerol, it is metabolized to dihydroxyacetone phosphate, which is an intermediate of glycolysis. And oxaloacetate, as such, it can serve as a substrate. Now coming to the regulation of gluconeogenesis. Now, what is the effect of blood glucose on these two pathways? Gluconeogenesis increases the levels of glucose, whereas glycolysis decreases the levels of glucose. So both of them have completely opposite effects. Now what happens if both of these cycles or both of these pathways are taking place simultaneously? Gluconeogenesis will increase the blood glucose, glycolysis will decrease the blood glucose. So the net effect will be nil. So both of these pathways have to be regulated reciprocally, or in other words, the regulation should be such that if one is on, the other should be off. Now this is very, very important. Now the three irreversible reactions of glycolysis are highly exergonic. Now if simultaneously reactions of glycolysis and gluconeogenesis take place, the effect will be only the utilization of ATP with liberation of heat. there will be no output. So these processes have to be regulated tightly so that only one is operational at a time. What are the points of control of gluconeogenesis? Number 1, glucose 6-phosphatase, fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase, phosphoenol pyruvate carboxykinase, pyruvate carboxylase. So these are the 4 points in which gluconeogenesis can be controlled. How are these points controlled? First of all, we will talk about some stimulating factors of gluconeogenesis in general. Hypoglycemia. Now, as the name suggests, the purpose of gluconeogenesis is synthesis of glucose. So, hypoglycemia will be a stimulating factor. Second is high energy status. In case of glycolysis, the high energy status was an inhibiting factor for glycolysis. So in case of gluconeogenesis, it is a stimulating factor. High energy, like high ATP by ADP, high ratio of NADH by NAD. Other than this, hormones like glucagon, adrenaline, and glucocorticoids. Glucagon, we know it is a pancreatic hormone whose purpose is to increase the blood glucose. Adrenaline is one of the flight and fight hormones, and also glucocorticoids. What are the inhibiting factors? ADP and AMP. Now coming to the first point of control, pyruvate carboxylase. Now this is a very, very important point of control of gluconeogenesis. Now this enzyme, pyruvate carboxylase, it is allosterically stimulated by acetyl-CoA. Pyruvate carboxylase, it is virtually inactive in the absence of acetyl-CoA. It is inhibited by ADP, and how this inhibition takes place, we will see now. Now, this isn't just a review of the TCA cycle, a short pictorial presentation of the TCA cycle. Now, why am I talking about the TCA cycle here? Because we have to think about the effect of acetyl-CoA on gluconeogenesis. Now, normally what happens that the end product of glycolysis is pyruvate. Pyruvate is converted to acetyl-CoA, which then enters the TCA cycle. So there is not any accumulation of any acetyl-CoA. But if in any situation the TCA cycle is interrupted, then acetyl-CoA cannot enter the TCA cycle and it starts to accumulate. Now, this is the TCA cycle. As we can see, one of the intermediates of the TCA cycle is oxaloacetate. Now, what happens in conditions of like starvation or fasting? Oxaloacetate, it is diverted into gluconeogenesis. So we have seen in the first bypass reaction that oxaloacetate can lead to the formation of, oxaloacetate is a part of the first bypass reaction. So what happens in case of starvation, that this oxaloacetate is diverted into gluconeogenesis. So what happens as a result? If oxaloacetate is diverted into gluconeogenesis, then the whole cycle is interrupted and the cycle stops. And what happens if the TCA cycle stops? There is accumulation of acetyl-CoA. Now, what does this acetyl-CoA do? It goes and stimulates pyruvate carboxylase, which is an enzyme of gluconeogenesis. So if we look at it again, pyruvate, it has two ways it can go. The first way, pyruvate, it is acted upon by pyruvate dehydrogenase to give acetyl-CoA, which enters the TCA cycle. The other way, it is carboxylated to oxaloacetate, which goes into gluconeogenesis. Now, if the TCA cycle is interrupted, it leads to the increased levels of acetyl-CoA, and this acetyl-CoA is a stimulator of pyruvate carboxylase and an inhibitor of pyruvate dehydrogenase. So actually, it is seen that pyruvate carboxylase is almost inactive in the absence of acetyl-CoA. So the accumulation of acetyl-CoA is necessary. So again, a review of what happens in starvation. The TCA cycle is suppressed. Acetyl-CoA accumulates. It stimulates pyruvate carboxylase and inhibits pyruvate dehydrogenase. This leads to the formation of oxaloacetate, and it is channeled into gluconeogenesis, and the blood glucose levels are maintained. And the opposite happens in the well-fed state. The TCA cycle is stimulated. Acetyl-CoA level falls because all of it enters the TCA cycle. Pyruvate carboxylase is inhibited. Pyruvate dehydrogenase is stimulated. More and more of pyruvate is converted to acetyl-CoA. So acetyl-CoA enters the TCA cycle and gluconeogenesis is suppressed. Now the next point of control, fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase. It is the same control like we did in case of glycolysis. PFK1 was stimulated by low energy like in AMP and ADP, whereas for fructose bisphosphatase 1, it is stimulated by high energy and citrate, and it is inhibited by low energy. The action of fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, again, it is similar as it was in glycolysis, so I'm not going to go through it again. Just a small review that fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, it is a potent activator of PFK1 and inhibitor of fructose bisphosphatase 1. So in the presence of insulin, there are increased levels of fructose 2,6-bisphosphate and increased rate of glycolysis, whereas glucagon, it decreases the levels of fructose 2,6-bisphosphate and thus increases gluconeogenesis. How this occurs and what is the phosphorylation dephosphorylation mechanism, please go through the presentation of glycolysis once again. Now finally coming to the effects of glucagon. Glucagon, the function of glucagon is to increase the levels of blood glucose, and it acts in various ways. First of all, glucagon, through the help of the cyclic AMP dependent pathway, it activates cyclic AMP dependent protein kinase, which phosphorylates pyruvate kinase. Now remember that pyruvate kinase is the enzyme of the 10th reaction of glycolysis. In phosphorylated pyruvate kinase is inactive. It leads to the accumulation of phosphoenol pyruvate, and if phosphoenol pyruvate accumulates, it is diverted back into gluconeogenesis. So glucagon stimulates gluconeogenesis. The other effects include increased fatty acid mobilization and oxidation. So when you read about fatty acid oxidation, you will see that the fatty acid is oxidized to acetyl-CoA. So if fatty acid oxidation is stimulated, it leads to the more formation of acetyl-CoA. And we already saw that in case of starvation, how the TCA cycle is inhibited. So if acetyl-CoA accumulates, more and more acetyl-CoA, it will inhibit pyruvate dehydrogenase and stimulate pyruvate carboxylase. Other than this, glucagon induces PepCK and also it induces glucose 6-phosphatase. Now this is the end of gluconeogenesis. Thank you very much. And if you have any doubts, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.